Good evening. Good evening, everyone. You know, I always start our programs by kind of presumptuously saying, on behalf of Hunter College President Jennifer Rabb. So after 8 years, I get to say, please welcome Hunter President Jennifer Rabb. Those of you who come often know I also start with a little spiel about the Roosevelt family, which we're going to save. But I also say you are sitting in a spot that would not exist were it not for Jennifer Rabb, in a building that would either have fallen down or been occupied by an oligarch had it not been for Jennifer Rabb. So one more time, let's count our blessings and thank Jennifer. So we are going to have a conversation with illustrations today. It's going to be very spontaneous, so let's hope all the slides align. Madam President, when you got here to Roosevelt House, when you got to Hunter and got to look at this, what is now the jewel in the crown, you found this entrance where our guests just came through, and you found this sacred space. On the left is the FDR Library with a leaky water pipe in it. I mean, what was your first impression?
So first, I have to just be not a good guest and ask everyone, how smart was it to hire the top Lincoln expert in the world to run Roosevelt House, okay? There were some questions at the time, but Harold Holzer is simply amazing. Chair of our Roosevelt House Advisory Board, the amazing Rita Hauser here. Thank you, Rita, for everything. Our board chair, Kathy Weinroth, and lots of great board members, and all of you. It's incredibly special to have all of you here tonight. And I have to just say, Harold, I don't think I've ever sat in this seat. I sat in that seat. I stood at that lectern. So, yeah, this is pretty fabulous. So, as many people will know, I had the great privilege of being the chair of the Landmarks Commission before I was president of Hunter College. So when I started to have this vision of what an amazing thing it would be to lead this incredible public college, doing a lot of research, I found out that Hunter owned this house and was able to give the house, through a block grant we had from the federal government, money to restore the facade. So that was my first beginning of a love affair with this building, even before I got here.
But then you walked through the facade and saw the interior.
But it's interesting, it wasn't on any tour. So it wasn't like anyone talked. It wasn't really in the consciousness of the Hunter community. It was this house that some people knew about on 65th Street. So I had to ask to see it. And those pictures are really what we saw. But actually what we saw, there was an effort before we started this, and I want to give due credit to groups of members of our foundation to think about restoring the house. And Helene Goldfarb's here shaking her head, but there was a problem because the idea of restoring it was as a presidential home, but it was for the president of Hunter. And that wasn't really working as a vision for this house. But there were some fundraising efforts, and it was one of those decorator houses. So when you walked in addition to all the peeling paint, you saw terrible wallpaper for decorator rooms that were trying to raise money. So it was bad.
As we see. So you faced some immediate choices, and I've heard the story. You had major decisions to make, and as you've described, it was not a time of solvency for CUNY or Hunter. And
it is never a time of solvency for CUNY or Hunter, just saying.
But there was pressure. There were opinions rendered that maybe a fast sale of this house could give you a one-shot boost, and you had choices to make, right? And your choice was for history and reuse.
It was. And as I said, it was, to the extent people on the campus really knew about the house, it was something we owned. It was shuttered. It had been shuttered for 10 years. And nobody had come in here except for the attempts at the decorator houses. And when I actually brought to the community this idea, because the board had been thinking about it, but the wider community was not engaged. And I brought this idea of restoring the home to the wider faculty, student, staff community, and it was not particularly well received. And really, and that was understandable because many elevators didn't work at Hunter and many escalators didn't work at Hunter. The ironic thing is 22 years later, many elevators don't work at Hunter and many escalators don't work, but we have fixed many of them in the rotation.
Over and over.
And that really was, I think, the point, is that we could have sold this, maybe it was an oligarch, whoever it was, there was a price tag of, it was upward of $15 million that we could realize for this brownstone. And we could have this townhouse, and we could have then turned that into an investment at the campus. But it was so clear to me that would have been a one-shot investment, and we could have done one thing with it, and we would have lost the legacy, first of I think, one of the best, if not the best, presidents of the United States, and certainly, I'm just going to say it, my favorite first lady. And it was such an important, I think deserves, and it was so much, first it was a part of the United States history, and we were the stewards. This was the house that this couple first lived in. We'll talk about some of the things that happened here. The richness of the history just for the United States. Then there was the richness of the history for Hunter. The women of Hunter College knew Eleanor Roosevelt. She inspired them. They told me stories. I mean, my favorite was that Mrs. Roosevelt would invite us over to the house, and she would make us grilled cheese, which I think was the only thing she could cook, right? And God bless. And we would tell her about our basketball game. And I look at this woman, she was very tall, she was clearly these were clearly true stories. Just last Sunday, there was an obit of a woman who said, the family said, my mother met Eleanor Roosevelt at Hunter College. That was put in the woman's obit. That's how important this place was. And Helene will remember, from one of our class presidents who had sold the most war bonds, was invited by Mrs. Roosevelt to the White House. And she was invited to lunch, and for whatever reason, Mrs. Roosevelt seated her next to Winston Churchill. Right? And Winston Churchill said, who are you? She said, I'm a Hunter student. He said harumph and never spoke to her again the rest of the meal. But so Eleanor was part of the Hunter legacy. She was this extraordinary woman who felt young women should be educated. I don't want to embarrass you, Rita, but I have to tell this story. Rita Hauser worked for Mrs. Roosevelt later after she left the White House. And again, Rita was here, knew Eleanor, because Eleanor cared about the Hunter women and she wanted to mentor them. And when Rita became one of the first women to be accepted into Harvard Law School, which, still one of the smartest women to have gone to Harvard Law School, her father said, I'm not going to let my daughter go to Harvard Law School. I'm not going to let her leave, go to Harvard Law School. And Mrs. Roosevelt saw Rita looking rather dejected, asked what was the matter, and Rita told her the story, and she said, dear, would it help if I called your father? Well, it helped, and Rita Hauser went on to be one of the most important and successful women lawyers as a trailblazer in our country. So that was the type of relationship. And then there was just the point, what about our students of today? What about being able to bring our students to the home of a visionary couple who believed in social justice, that believed government could work for the people, that government should be activists and support the country? And all the things they accomplished, what if we could tell young immigrant first-gen students that this was what was possible when government worked? And that compelled me, and it was my job to sell it to the community that it was worth the one shot of a financial investment in a system where, let's face it, we're never going to have enough money to do all the things we want to do, so let's do something great.
But that's what I find so fascinating, that you, with your landmarks background, came here and within 30 seconds knew that it was a landmark, but it had to be put to a purpose in service of the students and the faculty, which is what you did. So that's one of the threshold decisions that we're talking about. So let's take a look. We talked about the first couple, and here they are. This is actually, and we're going to be going back and forth in time here. This is a visit, I think, in 1933. Roosevelt came through to have the flu for some reason, and also to go to the 300th anniversary of White Plains. So he was still using the house, and here they are. And you see the little ramp behind him, which he used to navigate himself down the stairs. So this is a fabulous picture, and it's in the exhibition. And before we go another minute longer, I just want to acknowledge our curator, Deborah Gardner, who
Yes,
put
thank you,
together the
Deborah.
show. Deborah, stand up. So one of the things that makes Hunter unique and this place unique is Thomas Hunter's original commitment to what we call diversity. His famous line about students, which I'll let you do, about which students were going to go to the normal school, who were going to be
He said that the Negro will sit next to the Jew, who will sit next to the Gentile. And very old-fashioned language, but think about that.
1870.
Right, and so he wrote those even before, in 1860s, to think in that time that women could be educated and Black Jewish women could be educated. It's just a phenomenal.
So the legacy was continued, and again, these pictures represent two different eras. On the left is FDR's mother with Mary McLeod Bethune, who is now in Statuary Hall in Washington. Florida put her in to replace a Confederate general. So she was
Wow.
the head of Roosevelt's
cool.
Black Cabinet. And here she is meeting with this Hudson River WASP matron. Sarah Delano Roosevelt was more, and Deborah always cautions me on this, Sarah Delano Roosevelt was not just the mother-in-law from hell. She was an enlightened, charitable woman. And on the right, that spirit is continuing when Roosevelt House is acquired by Hunter in 1943. It's a place for interfaith centers, for clubs, and here are Black women sharing.
And we had the first interfaith sorority here, right? First, what? Colleen's. But that was amazing, and that Black women were so much a part of our community, but really celebrated here and really part of this house.
So back to Election Day, before we get to the New Deal, which, as most of you who have been to programs know, was kind of forged in this, not kind of, was forged in this very building. So it holds a special place, truly special place in American history, which Jennifer has been talking about for all of my 8 years here and before. What kind of a shrine to the safety net, the social safety net this place is. But let's go back. Many of you have been to the FDR Library upstairs. You might want to take a look at it after this event is over. It's on the second floor. It's the room where FDR would be placed every morning after he came back here from the hospital and essentially recovered from polio here. It's where he crawled around for a couple of hours every day to build up his upper body strength. It's where he practiced the walk to the 1924 Madison Square Garden Convention rostrum, so he would be sure to get there without falling, which would have ended his political career. But it's from that library that he was wheeled on the day after the 1932 election because Herbert Hoover didn't concede. After all, he'd won 8 out of the 48 states, or 7, so he didn't want to concede. So FDR said, I'm going to speak to the nation from the fireside. Get it? And here he is at the fireside of the second floor parlor, delivering a very brief address, which essentially is the first fireside chat, right here in this building. But why is the mirror covered? Can you see the mirror? No one had passed away. The reason the mirror was covered,
That's a Jewish joke.
it's a Jewish joke. I figured it would work. Fox Movietone News was in the house. And after he did the radio address, the camera moved in, so they needed to cover the mirror so it wouldn't bounce back. And one of the things Jennifer did is make sure that that clip was discovered and put online. So let's just take a look at FDR from this. By the way, this is his daughter, Anna, on the right, his son, Jimmy, and his mother. Eleanor was not in the room. She was downstairs with the press. So let's take a look at the Fox Movietone News version, just a bit of it.
I am glad of this opportunity to extend my deep appreciation to the electorate of this country, which gave me yesterday such a great vote of confidence. It is a vote that had more than mere party significance. It transcended party lines and became a national expression of liberal thought. It means, I am sure, that the masses of the people of the nation firmly believe that there is great and actual possibility in an orderly recovery.
And what's so amazing is that, the mark of a great university is really the creation of new knowledge. And as we restored this house, not as a historic shrine, for use for the future, we were able to uncover so much amazing history. So to be able to match that news clip with a location upstairs and so many of the other stories of what happened here. When you talk about Roosevelt becoming strong, Doris Kearns Goodwin writes in her books about how he pulled himself up the circular stairs to develop that upper body strength. And we can all look at those stairs and envision him doing that. One of the things we did in the restoration, as you all know, was we kept one of the original elevators. So since everything in the house is a mirror image, we had the two 1908 elevators. And that's what made this house an amazing place in history, because when Roosevelt developed polio, Sarah said, go to Hyde Park, get off the stage, really it's over. And Eleanor and Louis Howe said, not our FDR. And he's going to come here. And because of that elevator, he built himself a hand-operated wheelchair that fit in that elevator. He had independence, and psychologically he could come back from the paralysis. So that elevator is one of the most important pieces of architecture in history. So when we did the restoration, I asked the architects, is it enough to have one ADA-compliant elevator, which we built? Answer was yes. So we kept this second elevator, which is very historic. If you ever ride on it, it kind of clangs and is not necessarily advisable. But to have that elevator and to be able to say again to students, we bring students here for orientation, and we tell that story. The President of the United States was paralyzed, brought his spirit back here, and ran for governor and then president from this house that gave him that independence. So what amazing things to be able to restore that.
Let's talk about the New Deal legacy a bit. And I know one of your favorite episodes occurred on February 5th, 1933, the most consequential job interview, one of the most in American history.
So again, a piece of history to remind people that the inauguration at those times was not till March. So from that night that Harold showed the clip, that was November 9th, 1932, till March 1933, the New Deal was planned here. But the stories we've been able to put together of the reporters waiting outside and Eleanor bringing them snacks, and that Frances Perkins was invited to this house and in Franklin's library that's completely restored, and she was so feisty. She walked in and he was going to ask her, as his first woman cabinet in New York State, his Secretary of Labor, he was going to ask her to be the first woman cabinet secretary in United States history. I mean, I get chills when I say that. Think about being a freshman at Hunter College and just hearing that history. And she was so feisty, she put a list of demands in front of him before she said yes. She almost was a real Hunter girl, right? Right? There's an expression that, you could always tell a Hunter girl, but you can't tell her much. So I think she fits that description. So she negotiated in this house his commitment to allow her to work with him on a social safety net that would protect people and give them economic security. And it was the beginning of Social Security, not a perfect plan, but a brilliant idea and basis for what would completely change and transform society. So right here in this house, and we've learned so much more, as you know, Harold, about their whole dynamic. And when Frances Perkins' memoir was reissued with a new introduction, we found just how many people from her time at Cornell, people just was so attached to her, and we've helped bring her back. And it was a few weeks ago here that Harold and I teamed up together to decide we should have a statue to Frances Perkins. Yeah. So we're still creating crazy ideas here.
But also minimum wage, maximum hours disability. And my favorite line of that, secondary favorite line, is FDR saying to Frances, "You're going to nag me unless I say yes." And she said, "Yes, I am."
Yeah.
So he said, "Okay."
But,
You know, he didn't say no a lot here. which
as I
is-
said, it's perfect hunter girl.
yeah. So let's go to Eleanor, who's downstairs with the press while some of these great events are happening, but behind the scenes and more is so important in the history of this house, not to mention New York State history and American history and world history. One of the things that goes on in that transition is that there were people demonstrating outside, chanting, "We want food. We want food." Imagine that, right on 65th Street. And reporters were outside, and when the weather turned cold in December during the transition, Eleanor began inviting them in. So in the lobby area where the exhibition begins and where you signed in this evening, that's where the journalists were, with the tripods and the cameras and the cigarettes. Can you imagine how much smoke was in this house between FDR and the press? So Blanche Wiesen Cook, the great biographer of Eleanor, would not be satisfied, and rightly so, unless we talked about Eleanor in this house and the dynamic of influencing FDR to stay in public life, deciding to stay in the marriage. So this is a shrine to Eleanor as well.
When we started to, I want to give just a big memory to William Van Zyl Huvels, who many of you remember, the ambassador who helped build the park in Roosevelt Island, who really restored Hyde Park, built the center there. He kept the legacy, and he was a great help to me to envision this house and to get it redone. But he used to say to me, I would start, Jennifer Franklin was the president. enough about Eleanor, right? But this, because of Eleanor's relationship with Hunter, it is so important. But to think that the children she had here, how she came here and lived with her mother-in-law, and just the sense, I mean, her line, I think Blanchard was correct, that she would say, "I never knew where I'd see my mother-in-law day or night."
Right.
And I was thinking,
For
I had
25 years.
That's right. And just as we were starting to restore it, I had actually just become a mother-in-law, and I was so self-conscious and thinking about Eleanor and Sarah living in this home. And we brought Curtis Roosevelt here, and he told us how he would get lost because the houses, and if you haven't done this, just look in these rooms. You see the mantle, the exact mirror images, the staircases, the exact mirror images. And he spoke about how as a young child, he got lost because everything looked the same.
He also said, I work in Sarah Delano Roosevelt's bedroom. And he used to say, I remember when on a Sunday morning we used to burst into Grandmama's bedroom and jump on the bed. That was the maternal part. And by then Sarah had, among other things, had encouraged Eleanor to go into the world and fight for the rest of the
And
world.
this is what she would leave here to go downtown to the settlement houses.
Yeah.
And one of my great images, Blanche, was she would teach calisthenics. Like, why was she teaching calisthenics? But
Her first job in the settlement house.
right.
We have a great image to show you, if I could get it to advance. There we go. So this is the room where we had our reception this evening. And this is a celebration of Al Smith's victory in the gubernatorial election over Theodore Roosevelt Jr. So real family election. And here is Eleanor in the foreground. You know, and those teapots, by the way, does anybody know what they represent? Teapot Dome scandal. That they were, every Republican was now infected with the Teapot Dome handle. But isn't this an amazing picture? Look at the hats, look at the outfits. So it's almost 100 years ago in this very house. So yes, Eleanor is certainly part of our legacy here. So now we're going to bring it back to 2001, 2002, when Jennifer has made the decision, knowing this history, or certainly learning it bit by bit. No one had really put it together. How is she going to pay for this ambitious plan to rescue this ruin and repurpose it? So tell us how you thought of financing the public capital repair part and the intellectual part.
It was an important decision because, again, when people were talking about trying to raise money, another reason that campaign didn't go anywhere is that it's very hard for public institutions to raise money to begin with. Hunter was not a place that raised a lot of private money, and there was no real appetite for people, A, to build a president's home, but just to fix plumbing and to do roofs. It's just a very difficult thing, particularly for a public institution, to do. So it was very clear to me that we were going to have to seek a public allocation for this restoration. And that was the argument that I had to really make to the City University system. We were very lucky at that time. Governor Pataki was the governor, and it was something that he always understood preservation. He was a big parks and preservations enthusiast. And it wasn't a huge allocation considering what the types of money that was spent in the CUNY system for massive new buildings. So, and, this was at a time where, I was just beginning to be the president here, and I was demanding a lot of things, and so I just had a lot of long lists, and I just stayed on this one because it was so very important to do. But it was always the vision that we'd seek the public money for the guts of this renovation, and then go out to so many of you in this room to help us build the programs and the extras from the great, the audio, the wonderful, just incredible artifacts that we have here. And I hope all of you, again, will appreciate them. Leonard Lauder donated the 4 Freedoms Norman Rockwell posters from the Saturday Evening Post. We have posters here. We went out to auction and bought incredible Roosevelt House memorabilia. So Harold, just going to tell you a little bit about this piece, but this is the type of thing we would raise private money to do, to buy the right really artifacts here that should be in this house. We commissioned a photographic exhibit of all the beautiful WPA projects throughout the country. And then, of course, there's incredible programs that we've used private money to support. And I just want to spend a minute. We'll talk a little bit more about the human rights, but Ms. Rita Hauser's helped us build the best undergraduate human rights program in the country. And in our public policy, Eva Grove has helped us build a program that supports experiential learning that has helped nurture our 2 Rhodes Scholars. So the excellence of the private support that all of you provide for programming, but also for academic excellence, has been extraordinary. And then some of it is fun, like this poster, which I asked Harold to bring out for us.
Very close eye on this because it's fading. So this is a poster supporting Roosevelt's reelection in 1936, and every Democratic congressman and every Democratic senator and all the members of the cabinet have signed their names. And if you want to peek at it later, you'll see pretty famous names. And right at the bottom on right is Franklin D. Roosevelt. But the most amazing thing, and I'll show you a picture of my telling Bob Caro this not just a few years ago. So Lyndon Johnson is elected to the Congress the year after this poster was created, 1937. So I'm imagining it was in the White House as a display piece. And LBJ comes in and says, "Why is my name not on there?" Well, the answer is because you weren't in Congress. But he takes out a pen and signs his name on the right-hand side in the margin. So if Deborah lets you, you can come up and put your phone light on because it's almost invisible, but it's there. He just decided, I want to be there. He loved it. He loved
And I just,
LBJ.
so one of the other complications, so we were able to get the allocation from the City University for the guts of this renovation. But there was a complication. The chancellor at that time, and I want to give a really big public thank you to Matthew Goldstein, because he just listened to what the college wanted to do, and he listened to the vision, and he allowed us to seek this money and to move ahead. But he did say to me, I can't give you a public allocation because the City University, the state, does not own this house. So let's go back to 1943. Roosevelt says to a loose group of alums, after Sarah dies, you can buy the house from us. And that loose group of alums bought the house. And that group of alums becomes the Hunter College Foundation in the late 1980s. So this house was not owned by CUNY. It was owned by the Hunter College Foundation. So then I had to go back to the Hunter College Foundation and say, can I have the house? I have the money, can I have the house? And it was very interesting. Most of the board was supportive, but there were a group of women that had been very involved with the idea to restore it over the years because they remembered it. They remembered being here. They remembered, we used to call it house plans because they were not residential sororities. So all the house plans were located here, Barbara's shaking her head. And there was real suspicion, and as I said, I was working with Ambassador Vanden Heuvel. This is a man who at 14 hitchhiked from Rochester to be at FDR's funeral. Mrs. Roosevelt, they were shooing him away. She brought him to the funeral line, and he spent his whole life dedicated, in addition to being an ambassador, to bringing back the Roosevelt legacy. So he was helping me, and there were a group of our alums going, he's going to steal the house. I'm like, what is he going to do with it? And it became sort of controversial, this idea that the foundation had this very valuable asset. And why? And we're going to now give it back to the government? So that was yet another challenge to work through all of that. The house was ultimately transferred, and we got the allocation to do the work, and then we had the challenge of what to do.
So there's a belated acknowledgement to Governor Pataki. Let's talk about choosing the right architect to work with you. So you chose Jim Polshek.
Well, just to be clear, it was a public process, duly bid, so the lawyers don't come back at me. 7 years watching, at the head of New York City Preservation, watching the excellence of so many architects in this city. And there was something about having watched Jim Polshek and Richard Alcott, who was the other architect on this project, be so sensitive about transformation of historic buildings was incredibly important. And I asked Jim and Richard to bid on the project, and then we were able to award them this. And Richard was on the Landmarks Commission with me, and I watched his sensitivity of reuse as well as respect, because we had to have both here. We had to be able to find a way to make this house modern, accessible, and meet our purposes, as well as restore it, with respect.
So how, I know the answer to this question because I know you, but how involved were you in decisions and choices and paint color and
But it was, as I said, it was the confluence of my two worlds. And it was very interesting because I think, having worked really regulating architects for so many years, I had a sense of their talents and a sense of some of the challenges. And I did throw down the gauntlet a bit to Polshek and to Alcott and said, this house has to have a modern role. And it must be a place, and the word that Rita and I share, it must be a place of convening. It must be a place of convening. And it was a large double townhouse, but it was not usually spacious. And there was no room like this where we could all be together to have the incredible public programs which have defined Roosevelt House in the last decade. And I think we all completely agree to that.
right.
So I said, we need this room. But this room was not here. This room was dirt. It was dirt, completely dirt. And Richard Alcott and Polshek looked out, went to the back of the house and said, let's blow out the entire backyard. Let's demolish the kitchen, the pantry wings, and let's completely excavate until we can create a great room. And that's what happened here. And it was one of the times the architects really, I said, this has to happen, and they found a solution.
But you thought it would be, well, maybe not seriously, but you thought, well, they'll just bring a backhoe in here and clear it out in a week. What did you learn?
Once they came up with this idea, it was amazing, right? It was visionary. So we said, this has to happen. This was one of the most complex architectural projects. It was not just a restoration. So the entire backyard had to be excavated. But think about it. This was the type of architecture done where there were 4 city blocks in a square, and all the homes faced the streets, and the backyards were all connected, and there would be a big green circle, and that was called the donut. But you can't get a backhoe into that donut because there's no access to backyards. So with shovels, the dirt had to be carried out through the house, down the stairs to 65th Street. And then it turns out that 65th Street is a crosstown street where you can't put dumpsters. So then all the dirt had to be brought over to Madison Avenue where the dumpsters were. Months and months and months. And then this whole, we took out a piece of the structure. So this whole beautiful auditorium had to be then supported by a whole new steel beam, which also couldn't be brought in usual mechanical engineering ways. It had to be put in pieces through the front door and then reconstructed. And it was incredibly complicated by the architects, but the CUNY team that oversaw this was very dedicated. And at that time, there was someone who just bought this vision. Iris Weinschall was the head of our CUNY Construction, and she understood what we were trying to do here for the students and the community, and she really put up with a lot of extra things that you don't have in a public project. So to be able to have to bring steel in and dirt out in the middle of the Upper East Side was not for the faint of heart. And the other fun, interesting thing for me was that, of course, we had to go to the Landmarks Commission to ask permission to demolish the kitchen wings. So
I'm jumping ahead to show the auditorium.
yeah, so yes, you can see.
That's us, folks.
Right. So yeah, it was really a complicated construction project, and without Iris' patience and approvals, we would not have been able to get this done. So it was really an extraordinary thing.
I'm going to show a picture.
But then we went to, I had to go in front of my old commission. So I was extremely nervous. I knew how tough the Landmarks Commission could be, and we had to make this argument. And I want to give a big thanks to Terry Rosendeutsch, who taught me everything I know about landmarks and working there, and then came to Hunter with me. So we got our notes, and we went down, and we made our arguments, and we were successful. Then this is a city landmark, it's a state landmark, and it's a national historic landmark. So you had 3 levels of regulation. And the state and the city state and the feds are much more particular about history and restoration. In the city, if something has changed, you don't have to restore it. Often in the state and the feds, you do. So Terry and I had some very tough conversations with the state about, they wanted us to put back the the doors that were in the parlor rooms, and then we have those great receptions. You just came from that reception. That room should not be divided. It should be the big room it is.
Right. That's what Sarah thought, for
Right.
sure.
Same thing with the drawing room above, what we call the white room.
Right.
So it was not an easy architectural project. It was not an easy preservation project. It was not an easy project to finance, and it was not an easy project to build, but it was certainly worth all of the effort.
I mean, seeing this is just, it's astonishing.
and it was
It
just
reminds
right.
us of how,
And think about that. You can't get to this part unless you go through the front door.
Yeah.
Right? So all the construction workers, everybody's pouring in the little entrance.
I always wonder why FDR and the WPA authorized the 65th Street transverse to go right past his mother. I mean, I never quite understood that.
For another conversation.
Just
right?
let's go back and look at a few pictures, and
Yeah.
then we can talk. I mean, talk about reuse. Here is some of the upstairs rooms as they were used in student days, including a student dance during World War II. You see that on the bottom left. And I tell people now, all those who go to Sarah's library, which, as Jennifer said, is the kind of opposite number to the FDR library, there's a painting over the mantelpiece, and you should recognize it because a copy of it, this is the original, Sarah's favorite, a copy of it is in the Oval Office. So whenever the president has a meeting with a foreign leader or about the debt ceiling, FDR is looming.
But this is so amazing that this is where the soldiers would come before they went
I know.
off to war, and they would have a little time with the Hunter girls.
Well put. Another. When we talk about Rita's aspiration and all of our aspiration for Roosevelt has to be a convening place. Well, when we bring human rights leaders here, they need to be somewhere. And the other thing you did was repurpose what used to be called the servants' quarters.
There's a rabbit warren of small rooms on the top floor. And again, it was this idea, how do you use the house? And we knew we were going to have dignitaries. And it's, again, we don't have funding to put people up at a fancy hotel. But I knew the two things, that if we could ask people, do they want to sleep in Franklin and Eleanor's home, they would come. And if they want to have breakfast in Franklin Eleanor's library, they will come. And I have proven this to be true. I don't think anyone has ever said no to me for either invitation. So we created 2 apartments. And that's, again, can you think about in a public university, you just sort of snuck 2 apartments into this restoration, which have been seminal. Because now, as Harold said, we have had major world leaders. We had former Prime Minister of Sweden here a few weeks ago.
Well, here we have Denis Mukwege, who is the Nobel Prize-winning hero of Congo, who has made his life's work protecting women from sexual violence during a civil war, and is a subject of daily assassination threats. He felt safe here.
Right, twice, and he's
been
for him
here.
to come, and he stayed for a week, and then think of the students who met
Yeah.
this visionary leader, this brave person who, of course, whenever he come to talk to them, there was always someone from his home village from Hunter, a Hunter student. So
Right, exactly.
I could always, but that's the kind of inspiration that we can offer our students, because we have 2 apartments that we can put world leaders in.
And that, by the way, it's Jessica Neuwirth, who is the Rita Hauser director of the Human Rights Program on the left, and that's the playwright now known as V, next to Jennifer Radin.
Yeah.
So, and we saw that. Oh, wait, this is just Caro discovering Lyndon Johnson's signature. I don't.
I would say architecturally, so Polshek could also, next time you go to Carnegie Hall and you're in Zankel Hall, you'll recognize the tones of the woods and the structure, because that was a project they had done also, and they did a beautiful thing. They also, both of them loved history, and I knew that from working in them. And there are 2 elements in this room that are particularly special, and again, took brilliant architects. The 4 freedoms are behind you. And how amazing, how inspiring to see them on the wall. And as I said, I do a number of orientations here for students every year. And I tell the students to say what I just said to you. Turn around and read the 4 freedoms and think about what this country stands for. And that is your job. The Hunter motto is Mihi Cura Futuri, the care of the future is mine. And that's my charge to our students when they leave and when they come. And what better spirit to have than the 4 freedoms. And then the screen is down, but this wonderful, wonderful montage of Roosevelt and Eleanor photographs. Again, how inspiring just to have this as part of this room.
By the way, someone who's written about presidents writing, I'm always intrigued by what FDR wrote, what Robert E. Sherwood wrote, what others wrote, but I've seen the handwritten version, the typescript of this. Roosevelt wrote in every line, everywhere in the world. He wrote it in his own hand. He wanted human rights to be global, and of course, 75 years ago, this coming fall, Eleanor got the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Through
First
the UN.
presented at Hunter College in the Bronx.
Right. First meetings were at Hunter. Okay, let's see. Oh, well, you brought in Jonathan Fanton to be the first interim director, so I want to do a shout out for Jonathan.
It was great. Jonathan just come from MacArthur, and there's so many people who helped really envision what would Roosevelt House be. And I think you were alluding to this before. It had been used as a student center, and that was the crux, but it wasn't just going to be for student clubs. For me, the vision of what we could do at Hunter College was to take the best of academia and bring it to the public space, and to look for excellence and recreate it for our public students. So for me, I jokingly called, I was lucky to go to the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton, and I had a vision that this would be the people's school of Woodrow Wilson, that this would be a Woodrow Wilson quality, a Harvard Kennedy School quality program for public college students. And I am so proud that we have achieved that. All of you know about the programs we have here. I think it's worth it. we are so thrilled, and I see so many faces of people who come to our regular programs, and that makes me so happy that we've been able to serve the community and share our intellectual substance of a college with all of you. You'll notice that we never charge for our programs, and that was something I committed to very early on. It was not something everybody agreed with either, because it costs money to run everything we do, but this is our Hunter College opening our hearts and our arms to welcome and to be part of our community and to serve our community. But probably the real vision was the students, and to create this high-level program in public policy was where we started. And Joe Vitariti, one of our great professors here, was actually at the Woodrow Wilson School at that time, recruited him, he's an alum, recruited him to come back to Hunter and help build a program really looking at the curriculum of Harvard and Princeton and just doing it here. And that's what we did. And then we've added so much experiential learning, internships and special programs and so many speakers for the students. And then supporting our faculty in,
And I'm
really in
showing
terms of
the
research.
directors of our programs here.
And then I come back to Rita's contribution. We always thought we would focus public policy, and Rita one day said, Rita, what else needs to be in this house? And she said, what needs to be in this house is the spirit of Eleanor, the most important voice in human rights. This place needs to be a convener of conversations on human rights, a place where the human rights agenda in this country is pushed forward. You're a few blocks from the UN. You will be able to bring everybody here. And then we did something ambitious, and as I said, there are very few undergraduate human rights programs in this country. We created one with Rita's support. We have some of the best faculty. Most of the human rights organizations are based in New York, so the adjuncts faculty that come and teach our students and work with projects. Jessica Neuwirth is one of the top leaders in this field. She runs this program. And so we've really created something extraordinary for our Hunter students. So human rights, public policy, faculty support for research and conferences, opening our doors to the community. It was a three-pronged vision, and I'm so proud we've realized all of it.
And let's talk about two of our star Roosevelt House alums.
So it's very interesting. These are our two Rhodes Scholars. And it's a very interesting vision. The Rhodes Scholars, we always looked for a variety of talent. And one of the things, it used to be more athletic, and it's moved to be more academic and cultural and talent. So when we were prepping our students to really go for the Rhodes, and that was one of our big initiatives. Again, I believe you can bring high-level excellence to public colleges. So we raised some money, and we recruited the person at Harvard who gets students ready to be Rhodes Scholars. And guess what? In 4 years, we got 2 Rhodes Scholars. So it turns out to be, right? That was the proposition tested. But the Rhodes really, as I said, they want to see your scholarly work, and both of these students were incredible students. But they wanted to see experience in areas that the students were not working in. So Tamara Jean, our first Rhodes Scholar, was a scholar of the Black Lives Movement, and she was studying at Harvard, but her program at Roosevelt House was on the ERA. And she became one of the top scholars and experts and advocates for gender rights and ERA advocacy. And that put her over the edge for the Rhodes, because she had 2 areas. She was diverse in her thinking and in her scholarship. Dave did immigration studies here. So Roosevelt House, what we do here, the experiential learning, the curriculum for both of the Rhodes Scholars was critical, particularly in their interviews when they were promoting how they were going to
And Dave does opera too.
Right, and I was just going to say, and Dave was not an athlete, but his mother was a domestic worker in a house that appreciated opera. She never liked it, but he would come with her, and he loved it. So at the Rhodes interview, they asked him to sing a little aria, and he did, and he gave me Rhodes, so yeah.
But you know what's the special privileges of being here and being in this house for students like this? Tamara is the daughter of a Haitian immigrant who worked as a a janitor in a synagogue in Brooklyn. Dave Basnet is the son of immigrants who came from Asia.
I came from Nepal. It turns
Nepal.
out that
He never had meat until he got here, and someone offered him McDonald's. This is great. But he didn't tell his parents.
right. Well, it
These are
turns out
just-
that Sherpas have very serious infighting, so he had to flee Nepal.
They were all, yeah.
Yeah,
But
and
just
he
amazing.
he did not speak English.
This
or
is our
anything.
migrant story at Hunter College. Just saying,
Yeah,
it's
and I would say the House, we continued. I think the human rights piece that I really came to fruition this year. Again, I thank Jessica for her work. We were approached, one of our social work faculty helped build the fields of social work in Afghanistan. So she trained the mostly women professors in Kabul University. And when the Taliban came back, they all went into hiding. And there was a movement that she worked on to help bring these scholars to the United States. And one of them is currently in residence at Hunter College. We have a donor who's supporting her, improving her English. She's working with our students, and she will go on to teach social work, but she works with our human rights program now. So in residence, we have this extraordinary woman from Afghanistan who Hunter helped get out of her country and be in residence here. So this human rights aspect is so important in what we do here. When we cut the ribbon, it was Ban Ki-moon who came.
I have that.
You
coming
have that
up.
picture. Yeah.
Well, just a word about the late Bill Vanden Heuvel, whom we lost at the beginning of the COVID era. And he was such an influence to all of us. And this is the 10th anniversary of the House with Bill. And President Raab mentioned the elevator, which you should look at when you go back upstairs. There is the historic elevator, and it's now the William Vanden Heuvel elevator in honor of his work. And his family helped support that, the naming.
And we said the staircase is named after Robert
Robert
Morgenthau,
Morgenthau.
who we gave an honorary degree here.
And why? Because Henry Morgenthau used to go up that back staircase to talk about the economic crisis with FDR, his dear friend, as he was getting ready to assume the leadership of the Treasury Department. Oops. Oh, wait, this is another diplomat who is here, Margot Wallström from Sweden, with Rita Hauser and Jennifer and Jessica. And I guess there's Iris Weinschel on the right, but here's the opening, and Carolyn Maloney joining. She was here until a few seconds ago. She had another engagement. Carolyn Maloney is now the Eleanor Roosevelt Distinguished Leader in Residence at Roosevelt House.
And just, again, think about an education to a first-generation immigrant population, and an extraordinary congresswoman is in residence. You come over here, you can take a class, you can sit and have a coffee with her in the front of the House.
Or go to Washington with her
Right.
for the first Senate vote on the ERA in 50 years, which is what students did.
Okay, come on, how great is this? So this is one of my friends. No.
But tell the story of this
So,
arrival.
may you rest,
My
one of our
favorite.
extraordinary professors, Peter Kwong, was very active and was able to invite the Dalai Lama here. And he was one of our first visitors. Harold loves this part of the story, so I'm welcoming the Dalai Lama, and then out of the corner of my eye, I see the Dalai Lama down 65th Street, at which point I learned there's a Dalai Lama decoy, so do not be fooled. So we had the real one here. The other one was down, was diverting the press and any other security issues down the block. I brought him down, and he comes right over to this picture. He goes, FDR, Stalin, Churchill. And he talked about how when he was a little boy, I guess world leaders were sending him presents for his 4th birthday. And for whatever reason, someone thought FDR should send him a Patek Philippe watch. And he goes, I loved the box. I played with that box. And he's a very funny, if you ever see him, very funny. But it was an amazing event. He talked to us from a few different rooms here. He touched everyone. And that's of course, the white cloth you get with him. But he was one of our most special, if I had to choose one of the most special visitors to be here with the Dalai Lama, was pretty amazing.
These are all in the exhibition, some of them.
Yeah.
He was here for an all-day LBJ conference, the great John Lewis right here in this room.
Okay, this is my favorite. So Bill Clinton came because one of his speechwriters had just written a book, and we were giving him a book party. And I get to introduce Bill Clinton, and I say, and President. He comes up and he goes, Madam President, I love the sound of that. So, one of the great moments.
This is our 10th anniversary event. Doris Kearns Goodwin coming back, and Judy Collins, who sang Amazing Grace from
Yeah,
this
Judy
stage.
Collins has been a singer on this stage a number of times.
Yeah.
She loves to sing here. And Doris loves this house because she always tells us something else we don't know about it. Amazing.
So here is a tradition we started at Roosevelt House a few years ago, the Tisch Health Prize. Just another aspect of the things we do every year, giving awards to community health leaders who need further or deserve further acknowledgement. So there's Lori Tisch and the winners one year. They are heroines of automobile violence. They're holding pictures of young people who were killed. Yeah. So we're doing that again in a few weeks. The Gilder Room, we talked about, the White Room or the Gilder Room, the room where FDR gave his first fireside chat.
So Dick Gilder endowed that room, and as everyone knows, Dick Gilder is one of the great supporters of American history. And before he died, he gave us a fund for experiential learnings that take students through history. So I asked, sometimes I like to remember that Harold actually is the world's expert on Lincoln. And I asked him if he would take a group of students and me to Gettysburg for a few-day trip. And we did with the support of Dick Gilder.
Right.
Amazing.
It was fun.
So if you ever have a chance to go to Gettysburg with Harold, go.
This is one of my favorite events. It was an award night, not only for Secretary Clinton, but for that guy there, not me, Ben Ferenz, who just passed away at 103. He was 99 then. He's the last surviving Nuremberg prosecutor. And he was here.
I just again thinking, coming back to the purpose, students are invited to all these events. Sometimes they don't go to the dinner, but they're always invited to the public part. Right. Lives are just changed here 3-4 times a week when you as a student can be around figures that have been invited here and hear them speak and ask sometimes the first question. It's an extraordinary thing.
And the last photograph, just a few weeks ago, the beginning of a petition to accept that the ERA has indeed been ratified by 38 states. So Senator Schumer, Gloria Steinem, Ellie Smeal, Jennifer and Carolyn Maloney beginning the campaign right in this.
And this is what, and there was a very annoying reporter waiting for the senator outside, and the senator said to me, how do I get out of here? I said, there's only one way out. Right. He goes, it can't be, Jennifer. I said, ask your wife. She's the one who helped us carry all the dirt out, right?
Right, he made it.
Yeah.
So I hope some of you got this bookmark. I think what you've heard today validates this motto that we've created for this exhibit. This is the house that Sarah Delano Roosevelt built, that Eleanor Roosevelt sanctified by her presence and her vision, and that Jennifer Rabb saved and made relevant again. So thank you.
All right, so I'm so grateful that all of you've become friends and family, and you give this house its spirit because you appreciate the effort we put in to create these programs and to really live our motto of caring for the future. I want to give one more shout out if I can. Gail Badillo is here, and I would not be here without Herman Badillo, and I just want to say thank you, Gail, in remembering Herman, who was a great public leader and the chairman of CUNY, an extraordinary person. And Harold, you've made this house come alive with history, but also with new visions for our students, and we're incredibly lucky to have you.
So I know you all know that President Raab is beginning the last 5 weeks of these incredible 22 years. She's put us on a good course for the future. On the other hand, it's not going to be the same. I don't believe it will. I'll do my best to live up to her vision for a bit. But why don't we all go upstairs and drink a toast to our wonderful Jennifer?
Thank you all.